Happy Earth Day and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I do appreciate your time for these trainings. I know it's not always as terrific on Zoom, but it's some of them do translate, and we're hoping that this is one that will be helpful to you. Michael's put a lot of work into it, and I very much appreciate Michael's time and effort to make this possible for us tonight. I am going to do some very quick updating for all of you. Coming soon to a CERT program near you. We are hoping for a skills day. The idea, the rules, if you will, are that we can schedule a skills day when we get into the yellow category as far as San Mateo County, and it looks possible for next month. So I'm sort of working towards that right now. So it's going to need you in order to make it a successful event. There will be adjustments made due to COVID, regardless of what tier we're in on Skills Day. But again, I know that it'll be terrific thanks to the effort that all of you will put in. So keep an ear to the ground and an eye on your email for anything regarding Skills Day and the opportunity to sign up for that, because again, it's all how well we work together, and you guys are the best. So thank you in advance. As you know, things are not looking good rain-wise and moisture-wise in our state. This is the map that was released today, this morning, putting us in the D2 or severe drought category. Here's a closer look at the Bay Area. Are you able to see that? So Bay Area looking pretty bad, with the next level up is the red part, which we don't want to get into, but hopefully we won't, but I don't know what that's going to look like. There is a chance of rain this weekend. There's also a chance of lightning this weekend. So two things that don't always work in our favor. Hopefully the rain will. In the meantime, if you haven't had a chance to check out this website, readyforwildfire.org, it's got a lot of good tips in terms of hardening your home and fire-resistant landscaping, different budgets. So you know, however much or little you want to spend, there are things you can do to improve your home space. So please take a look at that. Also, if you live in Belmont, you're probably already aware of this. There's a chipper program starting next, or taking place next week, for a certain area, especially if you live around the San Juan Canyon area. So this weekend is a good time for you to start getting all your chippable material ready to go. Also, know your zone. If you haven't heard about this yet, you haven't been paying attention. So know your zone, myzone.zonehaven.com, not just for CERTs, but please tell your neighbors, your friends, your loved ones, anybody who lives in San Mateo County. And you can print off the website this lovely piece of paper and put your zone in it. Make sure you put the whole indicator on, so because there's going to be like a zone 19 in all of our cities, Belmont, Foster City, San Mateo. So make sure SM is San Mateo, FC is Foster City, and BEL is Belmont. And you can write it down and you can put that on the refrigerator, and everybody should have one of these at their homes if possible. All right. Also, there was an email that I sent out. The county put in this request today. It's a mutual aid request, if you will. They're putting up a pop-up vaccination clinic in East Palo Alto this weekend, and they need to get the word out to the neighbors. And they need CERTs, or they are asking for CERTs to please come and give them a hand with that. So if you have any time tomorrow morning, it would be very much appreciated. The information is on my email, and you can actually, the information is in Neon. So please sign up through Neon. Everyone who signs up will get details from me. If we do not get a minimum of 8 to 10 people, then I will have to cancel our participation in it. But I really, if you can, that would be terrific. So I will be keeping an eye on that on Neon through this evening and getting everybody the information they need so they know what they're doing. And I will see you there tomorrow morning. All right. And next CE class, continuing education class, we're going to hold off on May. I'm taking a gamble here. First of all, my schedule is a little crazy in May, but secondly, I'm really hopeful that we'll actually be able to pull off a skills day in May. It's a big wish and it's a possibility, right? So with that in mind, we're going to hold off on a training because we want everybody to be able to focus on skills day. So I'm going to give you a hint. If you want to participate in skills day, let's aim for keeping May 22nd or 23rd pretty light on your schedule. But again, no promises, no assurances. That's a maybe. But in the meantime, we do have our CE class scheduled for June 16th. That'll be a ham radio basics class, and it'll be posted on Neon at the end of this month for you to go ahead and start signing up for that. So thank you all. Are there any questions for me before we begin? Meanwhile, Michael, I'll stop sharing so you can go ahead and share your screen. Yeah, now I can see everybody. There you go. Any questions for me? If not, then I will get myself out of the way so Michael can take over.
All right, Sandra, can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead, Mike.
Awesome. And can you see my screen?
Yes, you just need to start the slideshow.
All right. There we go. Okay, hopefully everybody sees a big screen and here's my voice. Seeing me is not so important. I'm not that pretty. So, all right. So we're going to be talking about utilities and infrastructure. I'm Michael Radovancevich. I'm neighborhood team leader in neighborhood 4 in Foster City Division Bravo. Certified trainer. I'm part of FC Aries. A lot of stuff. Utilities and infrastructure is one of the fun ones. This is actually the classroom portion of something that we do every year in Foster City in Division B, which is do a little bit of a walkabout and look at utilities and infrastructure. So the two go as match set. Lately, because of COVID and all that, we've been doing the walkabouts, but not necessarily the classroom portion. So I'm excited to do this again. The content in this presentation was put together over a number of years by Jack Willey, former Foster City CERT member, myself, and Karen Patterson did a great effort to try and update Foster City content to the San Mateo Consolidated. So there's a lot of exciting new content in here. And hopefully we'll have an enjoyable time. Please feel free to ask questions anywhere along through here. I will try and do my best to pause once in a while and make sure I didn't miss anybody who had any questions, but speak up. And I'll be happy to answer things as we go along. Sometimes I may say, hey, we're going to cover that in a couple slides. And hopefully if I will cover it in a couple slides. If I don't, please feel free to remind me at the end that I didn't cover something and we can go back and review it. So we're going to be talking about basic utility skills. And this is a little bit of a review of the CERT training you all have had. And then we're going to do something a little different, is understanding kind of what is, on the other end of those utilities that you're familiar with from your basic CERT training, and how that might impact us during some sort of a disaster, and then a little bit of discussion around assessing the neighborhoods. So the first thing we're going to start off with are basic utilities. These are natural gas, electricity, water. These are provided to us in bulk by generally by monopolies or pseudo government agencies that we all benefit from, and they're critical to our survival. They can also be a hazard in certain conditions, and we're going to kind of go through that and what you need to do as a CERT, what you can need to pay attention to. So let's start off with the natural gas topic. So there are there we go. So natural gas. So this is supplied to us by PG&E, and it goes from large mains. I think some of you remember what happened in San Bruno about a little over 10 years ago now, where we had a fairly large main ruptured and exploded and caught fire. Anyway, that's a main transmission line, and that those large pipes get reduced down, go under our streets, under our bridges and all that, and eventually end up at our homes and apartments. And from a CERT perspective, we don't really do a lot with natural gas, except if we need to, we're trained on how to shut that off. So there are a couple of different types of gas shutoffs that we have to be familiar with: the appliance, an individual unit, main shutoff, and PG&E shutoff. So on an appliance, this is, like your gas range, or your perhaps a gas dryer, or furnace, water heater. This is located on a gas pipe that connects the appliance to the gas supply. Usually the gas supply is coming on a hard pipe, and then there's usually some sort of flexible hose that connects it to the appliance. And these typically have a valve on them that you turn about a quarter turn. And as with most of these valves, if the handle of the valve is kind of in line with the pipe, so in other words, you have the pipe, let's do it here. You have the pipe here, and the handle's kind of going in line with the flow of the gas. That's on, and then if you cross it this way, that's typically off. So you're going to see that pattern repeated a lot. So if you have an issue with a particular appliance, let's say that something got loose and tore off that flexible connection, and there's leaking gas or something, you can just shut it off right there at that spot, and that'll cut off the gas to that particular appliance. So that's sort of easy and localized, and doesn't cause a whole lot of grief to the household. So that's the first place you'd look for shutting something off. Individual unit shutoffs, these would be located typically near the main gas meter. For multi-unit dwellings, it's generally near a bank of meters. And again, here in this picture, we can see that the shutoff is actually here where the gas line is coming up out of the ground. You'll see a valve, and there's a little rectangular tab on it that is actually what gets actuated. So we're going to take a look at that on the next picture here. And again, these main shutoffs, they can be outside for single family homes, or typically on the outside, or perhaps in a ventilated utility closet out toward the front of the building. Sometimes they're in a garage, sometimes they're in a basement. We don't really have a lot of basements around here. But that's typically where you find them, usually toward the front, closer to where the gas main is coming into the building. And again, look for the meter. That's probably the biggest, most obvious thing. They're generally painted gray. And again, here, this little depiction of how you'd shut these off. If it's, this little tab is in line with the pipe, that means the gas is able to flow in that direction. If it's running across the pipe, that's generally off. So those are your typical appliance and individual unit shutoffs. There are other shutoffs, and these are a little harder to find. And typically these would be, you get the further away you get from the appliance and from the building, the bigger and more complicated the shutoffs are. And this is really, generally the last place you might shut the gas off as a CERT member. Sometimes there is a concrete or steel plate in the sidewalk in front of the house, in the vicinity there. It says PG&E gas on it or something like that. And you may see again, a gray pipe with that little tab on it. They're not present in all places. And we use the word usually a lot when we're talking about utilities, because we see all manner of different kinds of plumbing and pipes and things like that. There's some standardization, but it depends when the neighborhood came into being and the age of the construction and whether it was upgraded or not. So beyond this, we typically are not turning off any gas, anything larger than perhaps the PG&E shutoff that's the front of the property. So again, the operation of a gas shutoff: turn the lever a quarter turn to go crosswise, and that's generally off. So questions, I get asked this a lot. When should we shut off the gas? If there's an earthquake, should I shut off the gas? And the answer is generally, just having an earthquake is not enough of a reason to shut off the gas. So your nose is an awesome detector for the odorant that PG&E puts into natural gas. Natural gas by itself is odorless. So if it were unadulterated natural gas, you wouldn't smell it. But they put this really, really awful smelling substance in there, and your nose is very, very good at detecting this. So if you smell it, that's a good sign that there's a little bit of leaking somewhere. If you smell it very strongly, that's an even better sign. One thing you need to be aware of is that the relationship between when you can start to smell the gas and when it actually becomes dangerous. So your odor level, the place where you can actually detect the gas, is 0.4 of a part per million of the gas. That's a really, really tiny, tiny amount. That's actually 1/1,000,000th of the level of the lower explosive level of the gasoline, the gas. Natural gas needs to be in a fuel air mixture in order to explode, be flammable. You need to have some oxygen to go with the fuel in order to burn. And that lower explosive limit is roughly 4% natural gas. So again, you're able to detect it at a level much, much lower than it's going to be, dangerous at. Still, it's a warning sign. So, right, if you're smelling gas somewhere where you shouldn't smell gas, that's a warning sign. If you smell a lot of gas somewhere where you shouldn't smell gas, that's tells you need to get out of there and evacuate the area. And then, if it's possible to turn it off, if you can get to one of the shutoffs safely, do that. But there are limits to what we can and should do. And again, if the building has heavy damage in particular, we'd like to shut the gas off, but again, only if it's safe. Shut it off at the street or on the exterior of the building if you can safely get there. If it's not safe to shut off, you need to report that. Large gas leak in a building or a building with heavy damage. Those are things we report to people. Things we should not play around with. There are large gas pipes and transmission facilities, and these are designed to be operated by professionals. Basic rule is if you don't recognize if it's huge, don't touch it. Stay away from it. We're not equipped to do it, and you can cause a lot of damage by playing around with some big valves where you don't really understand what's going on there. All right. So other question I get a lot about gas is, well, I turned mine off. Can I turn it back on? And you're not supposed to turn your own gas on. PG&E wants to come out, check out your appliances, check out the situation, make sure it's safe to do so. This can be a challenge after an earthquake. We had back in Loma Prieta, we had a situation where we had a lot of water heaters that weren't strapped. I was living in a townhome complex at the time, and got back there after the earthquake, and there was a lot of damage, including a lot of water heaters that had broken loose. And we went through and shut the gas off for those because they were obviously leaking and had water and all that. But a lot of people shut their gas off just because an earthquake happened, and it took about a week and a half for PG&E to make the rounds and come out and check everybody's place out. So if there isn't a good reason to shut it off, don't shut it off. You're just going to be without gas for some period of time. Any questions on natural gas from anybody? All right. Let's talk about electricity. So we're all supplied with electricity from PG&E again, and increasingly we have people who have their own generation and storage capacity with solar power. The PG&E power is typically coming into your house through a main set of mains that are coming. In Foster City, we have a lot of underground power, so it's coming from cables and conduits that are underground. From nearby transformers that are in transformer enclosures. In some other neighborhoods, some other cities, you still have the exposed power lines coming in, but they're coming into your home. Typically go to a meter and a set of mains, and these are located again toward the front of the house, usually. And the mains are going to be the large breakers, the ones with, in this case, in this example, you'll see it say service disconnect. You'll see a pair of 100 amp breakers there. Those are going to be shut off power to basically the rest of the circuits, and the rest of the circuits control the individual circuits within the house. So that's a control point. When we shut off electricity, again, we're looking to do this in situations where there's been a building collapse or a fire or something like that. Again, only if it's accessible and if it's safe to shut off the electricity. Also, if there are, electrical devices with arcing or burning or some smell of burning insulation, those are indications that you want to de-energize that particular circuit, or if you can't figure out which circuit it is, the entire dwelling. Other signs of trouble are maybe not the arcing sound, but maybe there's some burning or blackening around switches, and or kind of like all the power's out, but you smell something electrical. So those are trouble indicators. And again, it's easier for you to turn your electricity back on. PG&E does not have to come out and do it, but it's something, if building's damaged or whatnot, you need to pay attention to that. One other thing you need to be aware of is that a lot of homes now are getting solar power and in some cases battery backup. So there may be multiple cutoffs, one for the PG&E power, which will shut that down, but the building circuitry inside the building may still be energized from backup battery storage, or the solar panels. The requirement is that all that solar equipment also have a cutoff switch. So these are required to be marked and will be again exposed near the other breakers and things in the building. You're going to have to maybe search for them a little bit. They're usually big red stickers on these that indicate that, but it's something extra we have to look for these days that we didn't have to look for 10 years ago, because it was fairly rare to have the ability to produce power without PG&E's help. All right, any questions around electricity? All right. So the last major utility that we're going to talk about that we've all had some training on is water. And again, the water is supplied from municipal water supply, coming in through large mains that get reduced down to smaller and smaller pipes and eventually enter your home. The water shutoff is usually located at the point that the water supply comes into the building, usually in the basement or garage or side of the house, usually toward the front of the building. And it's usually in line with the plate on the outside shutoff. So there's generally a shutoff valve close to the sidewalk. We're going to take a look at one of those. And this is usually near it or in line with it. Not all the time. Sometimes things make a little turn there, but they're generally not going to put the water shut off on the opposite side of the house from where the actual meter is for the water. So here's an example of a water shut off. It's located on this riser pipe that's coming up out of the ground. This little wheel here is the actual shut off, and this is where it enters the property. Do not confuse this with this little faucet here for your garden hose. This does have a valve on it and all that, but this is not your shut off for the property. This is the one that you are concerned with. Sometimes they have a red or yellow handle. Sometimes they may have had one 50 years ago, but they're faded. So this is kind of what you're looking for. Sometimes you'll see a lot of irrigation, plumbing, and stuff like that, and that can be a little confusing. But there's typically one of these, and usually multiple manifolds for the irrigation. There are a couple different kinds of valves, and there's a gate valve. This one you have to turn the wheel multiple times, and it basically has this little gate that it pushes down into the flow or pulls it out of the flow, enabling the flow. And there's another kind of valve, which is a little easier to operate, a ball valve, which basically, again, has this handle on it, but you turn it a quarter turn, and it basically rotates this ball in the socket, and it lets the water flow, or whatever fluid flow through the plumbing. And again, typically, if it's in line with the flow, the handle, it's open. If it's crosswise to the flow, it's closed. So I mentioned the water shut off on the outside of the building. This is typically found, at the front of the lawn or at the sidewalk. It'll generally say meter on it, and this is the meter that's metering the usage of water. The part that's the pipe that's closer to the street, there's going to be a little valve on it, a little that you can turn. That's the water company's shut off valve. There's another valve, which in this picture is both hard to see and hard to get to. If you take a look at it, it's toward the upper side of the picture that's going toward the house. It looks just like the one that's here by the 22, but it's again behind the meter, and that's shut off for you to use. You can honestly use either one, whichever one is accessible and moves is fine for you to use. A lot of these meters have the little sensors on them, and they're doing reading now electronically, so you don't have to go and look at the actual meter reading. So that's what the little wart is on top of the glass there. But most homes will have these out in front. If you're in a multi-unit dwelling, you're going to have a different situation with water, and that takes a lot of different forms, but generally the pipes and the shutoffs are marked, although in a lot of complexes, the utility rooms and things like that may be behind closed doors, locked doors that your key will not open. So you'd have to have somebody from the property, or who has permission and keys to get into that room, help you turn that off. You operate the water shutoff, again, like all these valves, is typically you're turning the valve so it crosses the direction of the flow. There are other shutoffs, again, out further from these water meters and things, but they're buried quite far down in the street behind these little blue or covers. At least in Foster City, they're painted blue, but they're fairly far down there, and the fire department has tools to turn those off, but we don't have anything that'll reach down that far and get into that. So when you shut off the water, again, you're shutting off water if there's a severe leak inside of the building, or when the building's collapsed. Again, only shut these things off if you can safely access the shutoffs. Again, if the building's heavily damaged, or there's a large water leak, or electrical, smoke, whatever, fire, gas leak, any of these things, these are all things we report up to our incident command post, and then I get relayed on up. All right, any questions on basic utilities, because we're going to talk about what's going on behind all this stuff. All right, Sandra, is the audio still good? Just make sure that someone's awake out there.
Yes, you sound great, Michael. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, thank you. All right, let's talk about kind of the big picture. So we're going to talk about just kind of how does all that stuff come to our homes? Where is it laid out? Some city infrastructure things, and just get a feeling for the three different constituent municipalities of San Mateo Consolidated. And again, this was a presentation we did in Foster City for many years, and we've Karen graciously upgraded it so we can cover Belmont and San Mateo. So this is fun because this is new. Some of this is new material for me that I'm getting familiar with. But thanks, Karen, for your help on that one. So let's start off with kind of looking at the nature of the cities, and this is really important from a CERT perspective because it helps us understand some of the challenges with infrastructure, what infrastructure exists, how it works, how it might not work, and also a little bit of a better feel for for what we might encounter when we're out there working. So Belmont, there are 2 emergency response districts, about 11,000 housing units, a lot of single family homes, some multifamily homes, spread out in a variety of different neighborhoods. A lot of, there's some flats in Belmont. There are also some hilly areas. So that's a lot of variation in topography. There are some major freeways and things that are crossing the area that is Belmont. And the things are kind of spread out, and with the elevation, it's not necessarily walkable in all cases, or not without expending a lot of energy. So that's a consideration when you're planning response for things that are going on in Belmont. Foster City is a little bit different. So there are 9 residential neighborhoods plus town center, about 12,000 housing units. A little bit lower proportion are single family homes. There are a lot of small unit buildings, and a lot of larger units, larger unit buildings, multi-unit buildings. And Foster City itself is very flat. I'm trying to think of anything other than the berm, the levee, and I can't think of anything that's really elevated anywhere in the city. So it's fairly flat, very walkable, very spread out in terms of the space. Let's see, and in San Mateo's got a little bit of everything going on in there. There's 6 ERDs, 40,000 housing units. So again, about half single family homes, and then a mix of 2 to 4 family units, and a couple of a lot of larger units, and some mobile homes. That's a little different. A lot of different areas in San Mateo, sort of downtown district. You have residential districts, you have hills, you have flats, you have stuff that's kind of along the water, like Foster City, Bayshore, major freeway running through it. So all those are considerations that you have to keep in mind when you're planning activities. So things that we're looking for, considerations for CERT, are that each of the neighborhoods needs to deal with the specific needs based on their housing mix and other natural and man-made features. There are different challenges that every neighborhood has. There are different hazards. There are different resources that neighborhoods have. So if you happen to have a Home Depot somewhere next to you, maybe you'll be able to get something from them to help you out and respond. If you're up in a canyon in Belmont, that's you don't have access maybe to supplies that you might need, cribbing material and things like that. So those are all consideration. We do have some areas in the 3 cities, of high density housing, and those need some special attention. High density housing is a challenge for a number of reasons. One, there are a lot of units, and there are a lot of people concentrated. It's harder to search and operate in those because they will typically be locked. And different property management firms have been either friendly or unfriendly to CERT in terms of having CERT on their property. So that's that'll need a little bit of special attention. The other challenge is that some of these facilities have only one-way locks in certain areas, and you can actually get stuck in these places if you're not careful. So things to consider. We already talked about the utility situation, that their shutoffs are a little bit different. So all things you need to consider. Let's go on to some of the other amenities of these cities. So Foster City is famous for its lagoon system. It has 200 plus acres of lagoon, and the reason that the lagoons are there, and a lot of people don't realize that it's there to look pretty, and yes, it does look awesome. But the reason those are there is because Foster City originally was called Brewer Island, and Brewer Island was a big, muddy, swampy cow pasture. And in the 1960s, it was developed for housing. And in order to make it not be a muddy, swampy cow pasture, they needed to actually raise up the level of the ground, and they also needed to provide for drainage in the city. So when they were deciding on what to do, how to do that, they figured out they would have to bring in about 6 feet of fill into the city. So this is generally, sand that they would dredge from other parts of the bay. They're bringing in and fill it in on Foster City and raise it up so there's enough slope and drainage to get the water out when it rains. The problem with piling up 6 feet of that sand on Foster City is that the weight of that itself would eventually, over the years, cause it to collapse under its own weight and essentially kind of ooze out into the bay. It would not remain 6 feet high, and it would just kind of, flatten out like a big pancake. And so rather than having that happen, which has happened in some areas of the bay, what they did is they raised the ground about 3 feet, and then they dug these lagoons. And these lagoons are actually a drainage system that provides enough elevation and a place for all that excess water to go when we have a lot of rain. So there isn't any spot in Foster City that is more than 1,000 feet from a lagoon. So that's why the city looks the way it does. The city manages the levels in the lagoon based on the season, algae control, and the whether rain is forecast or not. And there are gates at the south end of the city to bring fresh water in, and there are pumps at the north end of the city to go and push that back out into the bay. The pumps are again, one of the challenges in this, if they run out of fuel or break down, and we have heavy rain and all that, things could lead to some localized flooding. So San Mateo also has a great lagoon system, and it is again serves as a flood control basin, a recreation area. It's a lovely aesthetic amenity, and again the water level there is managed by the city to control how much capacity there is for stormwater runoff. And it's if there is some flooding or something like that, that's where the water is going to end up going first. So it is also something that is managed just like the Foster City Lagoon. So considerations for these lagoon systems, the pump houses and pump facilities, they could be damaged. And if that happens in combination with a major storm, there could be some localized flooding. Levees could fail, causing flooding, although we're kind of working on that right now in both San Mateo and Foster City. But it's just something to keep aware of. It also does impede transit. You have to go around the lagoon. There was an effort in Foster City to kind of get a CERT Navy together, so folks had some watercraft and thought about they could maybe move things across the water if need be. But it's just something to consider when you're planning and trying to figure out logistics and how to get from point A to point B. In some cases, you have lagoons in the way and you have to find a route that works for that. All right, any questions on lagoons? All right, we're gonna get to a fun topic here, which is, all right, we talked about various utilities. One thing we really didn't talk about that is really a utility is, okay, after you've done drinking the water and having dinner and all that, how do you take care of business? So each of the cities has a fairly sophisticated and generally invisible and hopefully not perceptible system for taking away wastewater, and they have some similar features. They all feature pump stations of one kind or another. So Belmont has 10 sewage pump stations, and what a pump station is basically it helps when gravity is not able to do so. So generally, things are designed to flow downhill, and that works great unless you have, hills in the way and something needs to make its way up and down. So there are pump stations which help with that. Some of the pump stations have on-site backup generators. The cities generally have portable generators that they'll take around to these pump stations if need be, if the power is out for a normal situation power outage. But not all of them have the backup generators. The pump stations typically have a reservoir which will hold things for some period of time, and then the pump starts and it lifts it up and over to wherever else it needs to go. In the event of power outage or something like that, there is capacity in the system, but it's not infinite. So if the generators are not there, not working, and we're out of power for long enough time, we may have issues with the pump stations. There are also, the regular gravity sewers, sewer lines, different materials. They can overflow. The mains can sustain damage. Some of them are, pushing 50 plus years old. San Mateo is probably older than that. So the city is keeping track of these things and upgrading them, but that takes time. Foster City, very, very similar sort of situation. This is a map of all the sewers and all the lift stations. There are a lot more lift stations in Foster City because we don't have the elevation to kind of help things flow. So we want to kind of move things along. The average flow in Foster City is about 3 million gallons of waste. And we have a combination of PVC and the concrete pipe. Again, we have some generators, standby generators. We have 49 lift stations, but don't have 49 generators for them. So there are some lift stations that are going to be, not operable when the power is out. Something to keep an eye on. The way these things work, generally, things start at the periphery and work their way up toward the sewage processing plants. So you'll see up here at 59 is a central collection point where the all the sewage in Foster City is heading up in that direction and goes over to the plant on 3rd Avenue. So, if you're in the Shell Street Bridge on a hot day and it gets a little smelly, that's station number 22, which has to go and take all the stuff from neighborhoods 4, 5, and 6 and push that up over the Shell Street Bridge and on its way down to the processing plant. So things to keep an eye on. Again, that's one of the things we check on our neighborhood surveys is the integrity of the pump stations, any weird noises, anything, leaking, anything going on. It's something to keep an eye on. San Mateo also is part of the same wastewater processing system. Again, the combination of normal sewer lines, some pump stations, some with backup generators, and this is a typical architecture of sewage processing within these cities that are along the bay. So considerations for CERT. Again, not all the pump stations have generators. Extended power outage can lead to the systems backing up. So, from your own personal perspective, having an alternative or improvised sanitation facilities available to you is that's a good idea in terms of preparedness. And then when you're doing your neighborhood surveys, keep an eye on the pump stations in your neighborhood and report any issues with those. Any questions on wastewater?
Michael, I believe it was 2 slides back. There was on your map, your pump stations map. That one is there a reason that number 56 is in red?
I don't know why number 56 was in red. I borrowed this this slide from a presentation that the Estero folks did at a conference, and I didn't doctor it at all.
No worries. Thank you.
Just FYI, after 9/11 and a couple of years after that, there's a lot of really great material that disappeared from websites. So some of this stuff may be hard to find these days in the form that I have it in. So, these aren't confidential. You can hear and smell where these things are. So don't worry about that.
Thank you.
All right. All right. We're going to talk about
Michael.
levees.
What are the emergency response concerns when it comes to sewage? Is that a matter of because I figure if things are out, maybe the water supply would shut down. I mean, is the water supply, would that be linked to the sewage system? I mean, in terms of
well, it's the water supply is an input and the sewage supply is the output. And there's a certain amount of buffering that's happening in the system there. But the challenge here is, for example, after Loma Prieta, we were fine on water. there's no problem with water. Our toilets were working, everything was great. We were out of power for 3 days. And so the question is, if you're out of power for some period of time, is that going to lead to the pump stations not being able to do their job and clearing out their reservoirs? And what ends up happening, if those fill up, those are usually at lower levels. If those fill up, things start backing up, in uphill, if you will, and uphill eventually ends up inside your house. Now there's a lot of space in there for things to happen, but if you're around, for example, here 21 Ketch Park, if you have a home around that particular pump station and that one does not have a generator, you could have issues much earlier than someone who's further away from the facility, so to speak.
Got it. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So and what you'll see is if we do have these power outages, you'll see the city get their pickup trucks and take these portable generators to the pump stations without a generator, and they'll hook them up and plug them in and turn them on, and they'll do their business. But again, someone has to drive those generators to wherever they need to go, and there may be other more pressing concerns, or might be hard to get the generators over some of the bridges or things like that. So that's just something to keep an eye on. We don't expect to be a huge problem, but it's again one of these things you want to keep an eye on. All right, levees. So in addition to this lovely lagoon system, we have this beautiful bay, and we're protected from the bay by a levee system. And as we've had global climate, change and increasing sea levels and temperatures and things like that, we've had more and more of a concern about the levees being able to actually protect the cities in in certain situations. So this last, it was before, I think, before we got into the whole COVID thing, but we had some fairly strong winds in Foster City blowing off the bay, and we actually had some localized flooding along Beach Park Boulevard by water that was sort of cresting the levee and coming in and getting had a couple inches of water in the street down there. And that's just an example of the kinds of things that folks are worried about. So what we're doing is in Foster City, there is a large project underway right now to improve the levee. And in part, this is driven by FEMA determining that the levee is not meeting minimum requirements and to deal with the sea level rise and all that. So we're going through that right now. The construction began in October of 2020 and is going to continue through 2023. And it's a big deal. It closed the levee trail, and we're it's been disruptive here for us. There is a similar project in a levee project in San Mateo, and it's happening kind of at that intersection of near Coyote Point and along where the Peninsula Humane Society is. There's a section of levee that's being worked on. That's being raised. So that's currently ongoing as far as I know. So considerations for CERT. The levee condition is something that we want to assess in an initial neighborhood survey. Take a look and see if is levee intact. Any challenges with the levee for neighborhoods that are abutting that. If there is any significant flooding, and we're going to talk about flooding and dams in a little bit, the levees are something else we would be concerned with. Either a flood in the cities damaging the levee and breaching it, and making it more susceptible to flooding coming in from the bay, or any other sort of damage like that, or coincidence of an earthquake, winter storms, flooding. All those things are things that could cause some concern. So again, levees are something not super top priority, but at some point someone should eyeball those things after an earthquake and check their condition. So We're going to talk about earthquake hazards a little bit. Obviously we live in earthquake country, and at CERTs we can't stop earthquakes, we can't turn them off, we can't really do much about them. But it's good to understand where the different kinds of hazards are and the different locations that we might have to deal with. So liquefaction is a big concern all along the bay, but particularly in Foster City because of the fill and some portions of Belmont and San Mateo. So this is from ABAG, different shaking scenarios. You can Google abag.org, and they will give you some maps showing potential ground shaking and liquefaction hazards at a lot of different points across the bay under different scenarios. And here we see Foster City and some parts of San Mateo, obviously a fairly large liquefaction hazard. In the Loma Prieta quake, there was actually a little bit of liquefaction going on in Foster City itself at the south end of Foster City Boulevard. There were a couple of sand boils noted, and there was a little bit of settling in ground. So at the Edgewater Shopping Center, there was a fairly lengthy but very, very narrow crack in the pavement that was noted. So the city fared fairly well, but again, that was a earthquake that was centered quite a ways away. Anticipate that Hayward and or San Andreas are going to have much larger impact and cause more liquefaction in the city. Whoops. There we go. Okay. So San Mateo, not so much liquefaction up in the hills, but ground shaking is very likely, and especially after a large earthquake. The San Andreas is running right through San Mateo, so this is where you can see this kind of little dark spot here. That's the reservoir, and that's going to be the place where there's expect to be a lot of shaking going on in the event of an earthquake, especially on the San Andreas. Typically, you'll have stronger shaking on bedrock, but less of a hazard from subsidence and liquefaction. So it's you get to pick what kind of a ride you're going to get based on the ground that you're sitting on top of. Other hazards in the area, again, not so much Foster City because we don't really have anything vertical, but landslides are possibilities after large storms in Belmont and San Mateo, and especially in the hilly areas. And landslides, if folks keep in mind, they start in hilly areas, but they go downhill potentially into the flats and all that. So that can, if you're adjacent to a hilly area, that can also impact you. And wildfires, as we saw last year, those things can cover a lot of territory very quickly. And last year they got fairly close to a lot of populated parts of the Bay Area. This year, as Sandra showed with the map showing the drought, conditions are awful. I think we're about maybe a little bit over a quarter of the rainfall that we get. Karen knows for sure. She measures rain on a daily basis, but I think we're somewhere around less than a half certainly of the annual rainfall, and rainy season is almost over. So that doesn't bode well for fire conditions throughout the year. So for earthquakes, wildfires, and landslides, I think a lot of it is just basic preparedness. Make sure that you and your families are prepared for evacuation ahead of time. Sandra showed the information on how to find out what evacuation zone you're in. That's good to know, so that when you get notified, you don't have to spend a lot of time figuring out if it's you or not. It's you, and you can get moving. If you live in a wildfire prone area, clear debris around your home. Make sure that you trim back your bushes and trees, and everywhere is earthquake country. So make sure your home is seismically secure. Bolted to the foundation. Your cripple walls are intact. All those are good things to do to make sure that you yourself are safe. These are the kinds of disasters that we're worried about and trying to respond to as CERT. So, but we can't respond if we're ourselves in jeopardy from not being prepared and not having a safe home. Right. So we spoke about the wastewater part of the water system. We're going to talk a little bit now about the actual water system itself, where we get our drinking water from. And a lot of folks come to the Bay Area and they don't really know, and are sometimes surprised to find out that we get our water from very, very far away. We get our water from the Hetch Hetchy water system. This began in 1914. Took a couple of decades to complete. It's a fairly lengthy set of tunnels and aqueducts and reservoirs that take water from Hetch Hetchy up in Yosemite and bring it to the Bay Area. So the average daily demand is about 300 million gallons. The system has been operating above its assured supply capacity for a while now, and that's expected to continue. The plumbing, if you will, crosses at least 5 active earthquake faults, and probably a couple that we don't know of. 2 of those, the San Andreas and the Hayward, are on the hit list for the next big one in the Bay Area in the next 30 years. Fairly significant chance that it's going to be one of those. And an earthquake caused failure could leave some customers without water from 10 to 30 days. They've been working on improving the system, spending quite a lot of time and effort doing that, and they've added a couple additional supply pipes and rerouted some things, and increased the seismic strength of various portions of the system. But it is still a system that's stretched out over 170 miles, and it's miraculous that we're able to turn on the faucet and get that pure amount of water coming into our kitchen like that. And it's something might happen during an earthquake, so you got to be prepared for it. So I think one of the things we give people in terms of advice for preparedness is make sure you have water. Make sure you have a lot of water. 72 hours of water is not really a lot of water. So, more is better in this case. If you want to kind of get a feeling for, at a high level, what this system looks like, we have the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir here in Yosemite, a couple of other reservoirs that are fed by snow melt from the mountains. They get down into the reservoirs. Then it goes through a variety of different tunnels and pipelines and things, and makes its way to the Bay Area. And then there are a couple of different routes that it takes across the Bay Area. Some come directly across the Bay, some do an end around through San Jose. So there's a little bit of redundancy there. And then they ultimately end up getting into the Crystal Springs Reservoir, and then that's water is pulled out of that and processed and just delivered to San Francisco. It's their water system actually, and folks like us who pay them for the privilege of using the water. So it's a fairly lovely system. We get great water, some of the best in the country, but it is susceptible to earthquake damage, and we should be prepared to deal without having some for some period of time after an earthquake. So a couple other facts and figures on this. Again, I said we're using about 300 million gallons a day. They have targets to be able to get back to that level within 30 days after a major earthquake. But there may be a reduction in supply. If some of the local pipes and mains get compromised, there might also be contamination. So the supply might be fine. The pipes might need some work in a local area. So those are all things that we should consider. So again, make sure you have water on hand. Conserve water after an event. Don't if you see water just running, please shut it off. Report large main breaks, and shut it off yourself if for small leaks, if that's possible. Any questions on water? All right. So I mentioned we talked about some flooding and stuff. We actually live in a couple of dam inundation areas. So as you're driving along 280 and you go by the Flintstone house, the thing you're driving on is up in Hillsborough is actually you're going over where the dam is, and that's essentially holding back Crystal Springs Reservoir and allowing it to be a reservoir. That dam was built in 1890, and so it survived the large earthquake in 1906 and also the 89 earthquake. But 1890 is a long time ago. So if we have another quake on the San Andreas, don't know what's going to happen. If that does fail for some reason, the inundation area here is depicted in blue. So it'll basically go down through the canyon through Hillsborough and then kind of spread out in the flat areas of San Mateo along the bay, and roll off into the bay. Belmont has its own hazard. The Notre Dame Dam has a small capacity, and it will not affect as much of the Belmont as for example you saw in Foster City, but still there is an area of the city east of El Camino, kind of toward between El Camino and 101 that has a potential for some flooding if that were to fail. So that's something to keep an eye on. Considerations for CERT: obviously we can't stop floods, but if we do have some sort of a dam failure, it's something that will slow us down and present some hazards and things like that in terms of water. And we want to just be aware that that is something that might happen. All right. So we covered electricity earlier, and I'm going to kind of move on from talking about household electricity to some of the bigger power lines and some of the hazards with those. In Foster City, we have some fairly large power lines that cross over the city that are actually taking power up to the San Francisco and up to the substation at Coyote Point. And so this is for us a significant concern. There are parts of San Mateo and Belmont that likewise have high voltage lines. So when I'm talking about electrical equipment, you'll see these here mention of qualified people and all that. And so, a qualified person is someone who is knowledgeable in the construction and operation of electrical power transmission and distribution equipment. We as CERTs are not qualified to touch high voltage equipment. So that's something to keep in mind. We generally stay away from these things. And so this discussion is going to be about staying away, and if you get caught in it, how to get out of it. One thing that I think is really important to understand, and you guys may remember from your CERT training, you might have seen a video where there's a power line on vehicle and various other situations with power lines and down power lines and things like that. At one point, you see somebody shuffling their feet, and I'm going to explain kind of why that is a thing to do. So when a high voltage line touches the ground, and here you see in this drawing a 5,000 volt line, kind of hitting the ground near the pole, the voltage does not drop to zero for some distance away from that point. So it might be, let's say, 5,000 volts where it's touching the ground, and maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 feet out, it might still be 1,000 volts. So these voltage gradients can extend large distances depending on the soil, moisture content of the soil, the salinity, all sorts of things like that. The challenge that you have when you have a voltage gradient like this, and especially if you're walking on it, is that you could have a significant voltage difference between one leg and the other. So if you think about it here, let's just imagine that I usually do this in a large room, so it's a little hard for you guys to see it. My arms are about my fingertips are about 6 feet apart. Let's just say that the voltage dropped from 5,000 volts to 0 volts across 6 feet. it's probably not that small, but let's, for illustrative purposes, let's do that. And let's say that you're standing right here in the middle, and you've got, 1 foot on the let's say 2 foot mark over here, and the other foot on the 4 foot mark over here. So it's going from 5,000 to 0 across 6 feet. You're kind of in the middle of that, standing with your feet apart. So one of your feet is somewhere around 3,000, 4,000 volts, and the other foot is somewhere around, 1,500, 2,000 volts. What is the voltage difference between your legs? It's about 1,000 volts. What is bridging the gap between 1 foot and the other? You. So if you're standing there with your feet apart across a voltage gradient, and you're conductive, you're going to have a voltage difference through your body of 1,000 volts in that case. So when we do the videos, and we show people shuffling away from these down power lines and things like that, what they're trying to do is they're trying to minimize the potential difference between 1 foot and the other by keeping them very close together. So that's why the shuffling thing happens. So that'll maybe remind you to shuffle your feet to get away from one of these things. The best thing to do is never get close to them. So safe distances, again, we don't have the elevated lines at Foster City, but Belmont and San Mateo do. Rules of thumb, never less than 33 feet or 10 meters. Rule of thumb is 1 span, the distance between the 2 poles or towers. So if you see, the towers there, let's say about 20, 30 feet apart, you should stay, 30 feet away minimum from wherever the down power line is. So that's a rough rule of thumb. So I spoke about the step potential. There's also touch potential. If something is energized and you touch it, you could be the path to ground for that electricity that can kill you very easily. And I touched on this also a little while ago with the additional solar and battery backup systems we have. PG&E might be out. You might have the mains shut down on the building, but you might still have generators, batteries, solar power systems, other things that are operating. So again, look for the kill switches for those before you go around, in a building that might have, it might be damaged. Let's say it's moderately damaged and you're trying to evacuate something and maybe some wires are downed or broken in the building. You should make sure you've shut off the power and are pretty confident that's happening. If you're in doubt, treat everything like it's a live wire. Don't get hung up on any of that. So other hazards, occasionally when there are power failures and short circuits in the system, PG&E, to preserve the system, will shut things off for a period of time. So for example, let's say there was a tree branch and it hit some power lines and caused a short, and PG&E detects a short, they will shut things down so it doesn't damage anything. But that's a transient in some sense from PG&E's perspective. And they may re-energize the lines to see if, okay, whatever happened, did it resolve itself? That can surprise some people who think that, oh gee, the power's been cut, it's going to be safe for a while. So please be aware that power lines can be re-energized by PG&E, and you don't have a lot of control over that. The pros do. They generally have to call PG&E in to shut things down at a major control point, and that sometimes takes some period of time. Other hazards are arcing. So if you have high voltage equipment and there's smoke in the air or water spray or things like that, that can actually make the air more conductive and can actually create a path for electricity to follow that wasn't there, in dry, clear air. And so that's another hazard. And sometimes you can have, people and or animals can help bridge that gap. I once saw a video of an unfortunate bird that was flying through a space that was smoky with some high voltage line exposed, and they ended up helping create just enough of a conductive path through that that it was not good for the bird. So, stay away from high voltage equipment. It's funny, it's weird. You have to be really trained to deal with it. And PG&E spends a lot of time and effort and has very specialized equipment and training to go in and deal with these sorts of things. So kind of connecting this down to, okay, we had the high voltage stuff, stay away from that. Kind of how does this high voltage actually get to your home and get down into the things that you have some control over and can do. So typically you have those high voltage lines. They're running at let's say 200,000 volts, 100,000 volts. Those are the big regional transmission lines. They're going to these substations like the one you have near Coyote Point. That takes that high voltage, steps it down to lower voltages, typically under 100,000 volts. Those go sometimes on small towers or poles like you see here. And those are high voltage wires on those. They then get brought down and into transformers. Typically, you're going from like 12,000 volts down to a household, or neighborhood transformer, which is going to be 240, 120, and then the service for the house goes off of that. So you have varying voltages in there. Those big green boxes, when we look at those on our walkabouts, that's something, again, high voltage equipment in there. Don't touch it. Don't play with it. It's not for you to fix or get into. If it's cracked open, stay away from it. I once saw PG&E, shutting off power to our neighborhood, and they had a guy in a space suit type thing, a flashover suit with a big 20-foot fiberglass pole, kind of angling his way into the cabinet to go and flip the large breaker that's in there in order to shut off our neighborhood. So they take that stuff very seriously, and they're trained. So it's not something for us to mess around with. We already covered the distribution equipment, and the major lines in the area. There are large power lines that go up and down California, and then we have smaller lines that go up through the Bay Area. I mentioned already the 110, 220,000 volt lines that are running up and down the peninsula, come through Foster City. There's some that come across the Bay, and we also have high voltage lines in Belmont and San Mateo. So so that was it for kind of like an overview of the infrastructure and utilities. I think let me just close off with a couple of words about neighborhood preparation and then open up to any questions. One of the things that we do and we advise everybody to do in their ERD or neighborhood is do a walkabout. So this is something that we do in Foster City in Division B once a year. Essentially, we take a group from CERT, and we'll go walk around the neighborhood and we'll look for hazards and find the shutoff valves and where the electricity is and see where the bridges are and where the pump stations are and all that. It's really good to go out there and do that. Again, if you can come and join us for ours, Sandra will, I think we post those for Division B up somewhere. If not, you can ask and we can let you know when that's going to be. But it's something you can organize yourself at the neighborhood or ERD level. Go out, look around, see what normal looks like today. That's another good thing to do is see, what are the conditions out there today. If something is cracked today, the earthquake didn't do it after we have the earthquake. So you'll know that wasn't quite normal to begin with. However, if everything was nice and level and looked good, and then after the earthquake, it's all a kilter, then you'll know that maybe the earthquake did do something with it. So walkabouts are good for familiarizing yourself with the neighborhood, understanding what shutoffs look like, understanding out the layout of the neighborhood, and you get a lot of experience kind of walking around and looking at things, and it's good preparation for responding in the event of an earthquake or other disaster. And then as you are operating in after an activation, one of the things you should be keeping an eye out for are all the hazards and things that I mentioned throughout this talk. Keep an eye on your infrastructure. We all need that to keep us going. If it's not healthy or not working right, it's just like, ourselves or our neighbors. We want to report that to someone who can perhaps make that a little bit better. and then keep an eye out on these things as you're doing your disaster response, and watch out for hazards. So I think that was the end of the prepared material. Yeah, and happy to take any questions or go back and review anything that anybody has any interest in.
The Crystal Springs Dam recently underwent some major upgrades. Can you comment on what they did, or what what happened at the dam?
That is excellent news. I'm not aware of the details. I know that was planned. I did not realize they had actually gone ahead and completed those. So that is something I could maybe add some supplementary slides to this when we post it that has some of that information in there.
Hi, this is Pat.
Does
in
anyone,
short-
Sandra, do you have any, or Karen, do you have any
I do not have anything
Okay,
additional
so
that I
good.
can
All right.
offer tonight.
Sandra?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Pat.
Hey, Pat.
In short, they added about 3 feet to the top of the dam, which doesn't sound like much, but if you think of adding 3 feet across the entire level of the lake, that's a lot of extra water. And they also did some seismic retrofits. It was completed, I think, like a year and a half ago. But that dam, when it was built, it was overbuilt for what it is. So it's extremely thick and has a lot more concrete in it than you would normally have. So it's Strauss did a very good job in building that dam.
Yeah, that's excellent considering where it sits.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pat. Other questions? All right, Sandra, do we have anything in the chat or anywhere?
No, I think Maria is looking to ask a question. Go ahead, Maria.
Okay.
Does anybody know about PG&E activity in Foster City? Because this morning, I have a lot of PG&E people in front of my house. They did work. All answers were routine checkup. Okay, routine checkup. It was huge work with a lot of people, with a lot of digging, and we do not have electricity from early morning till 5 p.m., but they do not provide any explanation. That does not look like slightly something checked out. And from my friend, I know in the central part of Foster City, they had something similar, not related to damage of construction, but what they were explaining, routine checkup. But again, they did not have electricity like a couple of days, like for a certain period of time. So anybody has more information? What's going on with PG&E?
I don't know if Sandra has any information. I have a personal story that I'll chime in, but if anyone has any like live, up to the minute information about that, feel free to chime in.
Maria, did you receive any mail or any letters?
No, that was another thing. Usually they provided something upfront because it's like large catamaran street, and usually we receive upfront email or something on our phone, and we know it's like next day or in a couple of days routine checkup, and we would sit without electricity. Nothing like this. This morning, no electricity. We check on the website and see note, routine checkup. Not me, not my husband, not anybody else received in our family anything about it. So I have like slight concern. Was it really routine checkup? What was this?
Yeah, I've got no notice on this. Michael, if you want to go ahead with your story, I don't have any.
Yeah, I don't have any information on this specific circumstance, but it's somewhat similar to something that we experienced, and this is actually a gas leak story. So my wife and I, like Karen, we like to take a walk around the neighborhood, and after several days, there's this one spot we kept on passing, and we're like, you smell that? Yeah, it kind of smells like gas, just like very light gas smell, but always kind of in the same spot. And after smelling that for a couple of days, we decided to report it. And so PG&E sent out the guy with a meter, and they have these very sensitive meters, and they went all over the intersection where this was in neighborhood 4, and they could detect the gas, but they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And that's one of the things with gas is sometimes it can travel a long way through the ground and around things and all that, and end up emerging quite a distance away from where it's actually leaking. And so, after not being able to localize it, they called in what sounds like a very similar crew, and they proceeded to dig up most of that intersection. They were digging here, digging there, looking at this spot, looking at that spot, made a big, huge mess, and finally, isolated the one segment of the plastic piping that carries the gas in, that they then replaced. But because the gas is fluid and kind of goes all over the place, it's sometimes hard to localize it. So there's a possibility that they were trying to figure out where a gas leak was, and it wasn't, the gas leak wasn't cooperating with them, so they had to poke around in a bunch of different places, and they generally make a big mess when they do this because they're kind of in a hurry, which is probably why they don't put a notice out saying, hey, we're gonna dig up your street in the next 5 minutes because we're looking for something. So that might be what was going on. I don't know for a fact, but that sounds very familiar. Let's see, anybody else have any questions? I'm used to seeing hands up in the classroom, so this is.
Michael, this was a fabulous presentation. Thank you so much for delivering the information, structuring it. So so did you build this deck, or was this somebody else?
Well, I the original deck, Jack Willie and I did this a while back for Foster City, and then Karen Patterson went and did a fantastic job kind of updating it for everybody. So we were able to provide something for all of San Mateo Consolidated.
Well, bravo on both counts. It was very well put together and very finely delivered.
Well, thank you. It's fun to do this. Fun to do walkabouts too. So if you have an opportunity to join us on one of those at some point, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I hope that, Sandra, that comes through soon. The question for you, if you were, and I mean, it sounds like it was relatively recently updated for the towns, if there were additional threats that you wanted to peer into the future, maybe 3 to 5 years, do you think there could be any kind of topical additions that might be made to this presentation?
In terms of new and emerging threats,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like if this was 20 years ago, there'd probably be like a piece on terrorism. That threat seems to have receded. But if there were other things, I mean, nuclear power, or I don't know. Something with the IT
I mean,
drones.
we're nuclear power has not been really on much of a seen a lot of growth, let's say, in the U.S. since the 1950s. So I think we're probably okay with that. And then terrorism and all that. I guess there's an opportunity for that to pose some hazards. Here I was kind of going for, okay, what are sort of the man-nature interface, and how are we living as a large collection of people, and what infrastructure do we need? We talk a lot about homes and shutting things off in homes, but it's the idea here was, okay, well, all the stuff in your home is actually just smaller versions of these bigger things that are everywhere else that feed stuff in there. And how does all that stuff work? So there's probably a lot of other hazards and things we can go into, and obviously we didn't cover hurricanes and things like that. I really would like to stop discovering new ways for bad stuff to happen. 2020 was, we had enough of that in 2020. So I'm hoping not to add anything new and exciting to this.
You want Michael to be able to get some sleep. Heyman, did you have something?
Not really, even though to Matt's point, when he was talking, one of the things that popped into my head is, oh, we're under flight path to SFO, so we're talking about potential man-nature hazards. Yeah, falls out of the sky.
Yeah, that is actually we've had plane crashes in the Bay Area. I was out biking toward the airport when that Asiana aircraft went down, and I saw the smoke and all that. And I believe it was in the 60s, maybe 70s. Japan Airlines landed short of the runway at SFO and put, I think it was a DC-9, I think it was, put it into the water just north of Coyote Point in the shallows there. So, it was, things do happen like that.
I think what Maria pointed out and your story pointed out certainly is that it's important when you're out for a walk and walking the dog, or you're out doing your business, just be aware, right? That's
Yep.
the important, situational awareness, which is one of the key tenets that we all need to work on as CERT members. So,
yep.
Michael, I want to thank you very, very much for all that you've put together. Karen as well. I know a lot of work went into this, and it's a great presentation for our group. I'm going to say good night to everybody, but keep in mind that we will be posting this on the YouTube channel. So if you want to review something or share it with another CERT member who didn't get a chance to view it, you'll be able to do that. All right. Meanwhile, everybody be safe and be well. Thank you so much.
Thanks all. Take care.
Take care.